to me. There no questions are off limits. I'll do my best to answer in a timely fashion, as well as give you as the best answer. And what I don't know, I will definitely teach you and show you the direction to be able to go and get the answer. So without further ado, we're going to get into the course. So the reason why there's a disclaimer, and there's probably no other course that you're going to have is going to have this on here, is that we are talking about the criminal side of the internet, the otherwise known as the cesspool or the bad stuff of the internet. Unfortunately, this is where all the threat actors and the people that are being the hackers, or they communicate. It's also not all bad, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But because this is the dark web, and the techniques that I'm going to be teaching in this course are going to most likely expose you to some things that you probably didn't want to see, we're putting the disclaimer out there that this is intended for mature audiences. That if you're going to be uncomfortable with some of the material that's going to be discussed here, or the mature topics, make sure that you proceed with caution and consider that this material is appropriate for you. I am going to do my best, but because this is the dark web, I will do my best to make sure that I screen the content to make sure that we're not going to be showing anything that is definitely not illegal. I will be making sure 100% that that's what I do, but also to not encourage or teach you, or I'm going to give you the information necessary to make sure that you understand how to navigate and to do a lot of threat hunting in the dark web safely, so you don't get in trouble with downloading illegal content or distributing it or trying to engage in some other type of nefarious activities that may be online, even though that's not what you're intending to do. Any questions so far?
No.
All right. All right. I'm your instructor. That's my face right there. What it looks like in real life. So, if you look and see, well, some of the formatting is a little bit odd here, but my name is Nathan Sheffield. I've been a cybersecurity engineer / architect for roughly about 8 years. I first got my start into cyber operations as a SOC analyst that quickly moved up into a security engineering position to a tier 2 and tier 3. Been in security operations for that entire time. My area of specialty and my area of passion is threat hunting, open source intelligence, and security defense. So I do dabble in penetration testing. I've kind of got the jack of all trades, master of none kind of situation going on. But in order to be a well-rounded cybersecurity professional, I kind of think you need to understand some of these things. But then, as someone once told me, choose your struggle. You got to pick your location where to go, right? So whenever you find your passion, hang on to it and then drive in that direction as much as you can. Everything else kind of falls into place after that. Just because you want to do penetration testing does not mean that you're not going to go do blue teaming stuff later on. So I have hobbies that, of course, I love building my own technology. I like dealing with AI. I like upskilling myself, of course. I also have 4 kids, and, I enjoy pursuing their ambitions and, making sure that we participate in some of their activities that they do, such as, bowling, baseball, that kind of stuff. But this is who I am, and hopefully I will be able to teach, and we will actually be able to connect and have a nice kind of mentor instructor relationship. So this is the agenda. So this is going to be a 6-week course. This week that we're going to talk about today is going to be talking about the foundations, legal, and understanding the deep dark. This is the 2 segmentations of the web. Actually, there's 3, but this is the 2 that people kind of get the bad rep in a lot of ways. And so we're going to talk about that. Week 2, we're going to talk about safe accessing methods, how to use Tor, the onion router, Whonix, and Tails to be able to anonymize and privatize your search. Week 3, we're going to talk about discovery and crawling techniques, both passive and active. That'll be actually a fun class if you have never dealt with any type of Kali or Tails OS or any kind of live distribution software out there like Parrot OS. We'll be able to use something called the Onion Scanner. It's kind of fun. Week 4, we're going to talk all about open source intelligence, otherwise OSINT for short, and correlations and enrichment. Week 5, data handling, analysis, and reporting. And then week 6, advanced techniques, defense, and use cases as a capstone. So we should have a nice, well-rounded sessions here. And so I look forward to seeing each and every one of you, and tell a friend if you would like, and you get something from this week one here. All right, so the course objectives. In this particular week, we're going to be understanding the course overall. We're going to understand the structure of what the deep dark web is, as well as the internet's, understanding the legal boundaries. We're going to understand and apply the sources and methods to be able to maintain what they call operational security, OPSEC is short. Employing advanced discovery, crawling, and open source intelligence correlation techniques, as well as analyzing data and document for preparation and report finding and effectiveness. All right, so the foundation. So this is where I like to start asking some questions of the audience. So when we're talking about the internet, we talk about different layers, not just the OSI model, but we're talking about the different layers of the internet. Does anybody understand or can tell me what the first layer, the most common layer of the internet is?
The physical layer.
Yeah. Well, that's the. Go ahead, Jasmine.
No, I was thinking the same thing.
Okay. So you guys aren't wrong, right? So that we're talking about that would be the OSI model, but if we think about way beyond that, we're already on Edge, or we're already on Chrome or something like that, or Safari.
The surface web.
Yep, that's right. The surface web. This is all the things that are searchable, right? So whenever we type into Google and we say, hey, I want to find cat videos, right? And so that uses what they call robot text and web crawlers that actually search and categorize the internet, make it a structured form that is able to be use those search engines to be able to find certain things, right? So if you type in, say, I want to see finding cat videos, it's going to populate, 15 different sources on the first hit, and probably hundreds of pages after that. Most likely they're going to take you to like YouTube or some other type of video sourcing like that. But what about the dark or the deep web? Anybody have any idea what that might be?
The deep web, isn't that more like your banks? Like
Unsecure network? Unsecure server or a network?
Yeah, it's not exactly wrong. So if you think about it in the sense of, has anybody ever heard of the walled garden or the paywall or anything like that?
Paywall, yes.
Okay. So imagine this is part of the internet that is findable, like the login pages of certain things, but then the data sourcing or the data tables that you're going to be interacting with are not searchable. So those are actually in a more secure section of the web that be accessed on the web, but you have to be able to either pay for it, have a secure password to be able to gain access to it, or be able to know some sort of any of the principles that who you know, what you know, who you are, to be able to gain access into it. You have to prove it. Those are, they call it the deep web because it's not exactly bad, or even the dark web's not really bad, but the deep web is like Facebook or Instagram, things like that, where you're not going to be able to see anything that's there. You're not going to be able to search it, but you can search that for Instagram, and you can search for Facebook, but you can't search for any of the content that's behind it. Does that make sense? All right. Yep. Go ahead, Jasmine.
So mostly just like all the inappropriate stuff that would has to get permission of your 18 and older. You mean like that, for an example?
Yeah. So that would be, well, not exactly. So whenever you deal with the permissions, if it involves just simply giving and consenting to something on the internet, that's not necessarily the stopper that makes it to the deep web. It is just kind of like a caption moment. So some of those can take you to the next step of being able to log in or to gain access to a more secured system to interact with the data inside of it. That's more like what the deep web is. It might be confusing. We'll talk a little bit. Okay. All right. So we'll talk a little bit more about it. So that's what, it's why the deep and the dark web kind of get a bad rap sometimes, is because it sounds scary and not a lot of people do know much about it. So this module objective is that we're going to learn about the layers. We're going to talk about OPSEC to keep you safe, to be able to understand. This is kind of important for this because anytime you interact with the deep web or the dark web, you have to assume that someone might be tracking you, someone might be looking at you, or if you, especially whenever you're doing threat hunting, if you do not maintain some sort of OPSEC, there's a potential that stuff might follow you back. So you have to be careful. And again, this is kind of that moment where we're starting to think a little bit more like a hacker. and getting into their space to be able to find out what it is that they're intending to do, or what it is that they may have gotten. That way that we can better prepare ourselves as a defender. Again, the legal side, this is absolutely important. And this is the reason why this is on the week one, is that there are legal boundaries. There are things that you can get in trouble with whenever you're on the dark web. So I implore you to make sure that you are knowing exactly how and what you're interacting with. And then if all else fails, never download anything. Only interact with it in a safe manner, for research purposes only, and do not distribute anything that you pull from any of these servers that we're going to be talking about, and how you can pull information to be able to analyze for defense purposes. All right, so we're going to move on. All right, so as we talked about before, if you think about the surface web, if you think about the web in general as like a iceberg, right? The most common image that people show up whenever they're talking about the surface, deep, and dark web is that surface web is everything that's above water, right? Everything that we can see. Then that's going to be your search engines, Google, Bing, any of the privately accessible services such as, GitHub or Amazon or Netflix, those types of things. Is that you can actually, even though Netflix is behind a paywall, they still actually index a lot of their videos, so people can actually find them. They're kind of a special situation, is that they will show you what they have on the web or on their servers, but you can't actually access or gain access to the material until you actually pay for it or be able to have that username and password. Any questions about the surface web? All right. So now we're talking about the deep web. So some of the common examples that we see here, these are the things that can't be indexed by search engines. So as you probably all have interacted with, you have email services, and you have, SharePoint, OneDrive, JSTOR, you have that, like this is a Slack. All these things save this data somewhere, but it can't be interacted with as a public entity or identity. Can't just reach out and start pulling things away. The only way that can actually happen is if you start actually having to hack into those services, and that kind of violates some of the principles that are there. So this is why this is called the deep web. You always have to kind of be able to get to that point to where you either sign in, log in, you transition from the web front presence to the data source and store presence of where those things are. So in this case, SharePoint would be in the Azure PaaS platform. So JSTOR would be in the JSTOR library database. And of course, Slack, as well as anything else like Zoom or Teams, that's all going to be stored in their respective backend software as a service or PaaS or physical infrastructure. Any questions about that? All right, so can anyone think of anything else based off of now what we've seen here? Can we think of anything else that might be a deep web site? There's no wrong answers.
What about gaming websites? Like, streaming services?
Yeah. You said gaming first, right?
Correct.
Yep. That is a perfect example. So gaming websites are websites such as like Steam, or, we have streaming services or websites or videos and stuff like that. That is a perfect example. Especially if it's not on like YouTube or some sort of like publicly available source, that's a different story. But if I'm thinking of gaming websites, I'm thinking of like Steam, like you're going to go buy a game or something like that. My kids use Fortnite, for example. They use Epic servers, Epic Gaming. That is a public game. You can download it off of the public internet. So they're using a public server that helps people download it. But everything else is all protected in the back end. So in order for you to interact with it, you have to agree and sign in and to their backend servers and data stores. So, that is a perfect example. So that's a great job. That's a great example. All right, so now we're getting into some of the more darker things, right? So dark web, these are things that are only accessed through special software. Why it's called the dark web is because there's nothing that indexes it into the public realm. There are certain things that have attempted to create search engines for the dark web, but again, they're only as good as what the information that has been provided to them, and or what their crawlers can find. What is interesting about the dark web is that this is a place where, if you think about like all the clandestine type of operations that happen, if I am going to transfer or send information, or put it on a file share, or do something that I want to make sure that it can't be traced back, Tor, the onion router, is the place that this needs to happen. So if I decided to set up an onion site, then I can make the site ephemeral. I can send that site over to a friend where they can then take that site, run it in the Tor browser or the Unix or Tails, and be able to get access to that specific thing. And then I can set it up to self-destruct or to make sure that site changes on a regular basis, on a frequency hop almost type of situation. So this is where the dark web becomes somewhat of a useful ethical tool, as well as a tool for not people who have low ethical morals, low standards. So what happens whenever you are dealing with the dark web? Well, let's back up for a second. Why is the dark web good? Can anybody see a good reason that the dark web might actually be used for some sort of positive purpose? Jasmine, you can just go ahead and answer. I mean, talk if you want. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Like you said, there's no right or wrong answer, I guess, but could it just be the positive part of it could just be for well, that's the answer I had before. I was going to say this one was research purposes of sometimes you can find more information than what you would get from a site that might have more of a protection.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does. Yeah, it makes sense. No, and
I
that's
probably
yep.
would say maybe for the police forces, maybe they can use the dark web maybe to find
Yeah.
bad guys.
Yep. I mean, that's not a bad angle. That's kind of what we're getting ready to learn through this course, right? So when we get some more of the meat and potatoes of actually hunting in here, this is kind of what the law enforcement would do. I see Brandon, you're coming on and off. Go ahead.
I was going to be more broad about it. I was going to say for just overall privacy.
Perfect. All those answers were good answers, right? So the dark web gets a bad rap just because it's called dark, right? I mean, it's not all bad. There is bad things, just like there's anything on the surface web. There's going to be bad stuff on the surface web too. The dark web can be used for good in the sense that it does maintain anonymity, and it also helps people stay protected from like oppressive sources, oppressive regimes, for example. Think about Iran. If they want to get information out of Iran, Iran is a very heavily monitored country. If we want to see human rights violations or things like that, oftentimes Tor is the method that people use because they can't stop it. There's nothing that organizations can do to be able to stop this. Same thing for like China or Russia. Tor is a great source to be able to help people stay protected, as well as trying to gain access to information or sharing information that otherwise might be stopped by people who want to cause harm, essentially. In the next slide, we are going to see some examples of how the Tor network works, right? So I know this isn't the greatest slide, but I thought this was the best one, and I'd be able to talk through it. So if you think about this is you in this section here. When you essentially enable and activate the Tor network, you have access to both what they call the surface web and the onion. So two ways that you can navigate. You can type in google.com, that takes you to the surface web. It will still jump you through a lot of these Tor nodes. But if you decide to go to the onion in any one of these, and as you can see, some of these are traditional onion sites. It's called an ephemeral site. Sorry. And this is the human readable site, right? So this is the site that stays static, and you might be able to read some of the information on the top of there. Traditionally, what ends up happening here within the onion sites is that we can see the human readable, and then we see the obfuscated key for the site or the onion URL that actually takes them to the multiple different hops and locations to be able to gain access to get into the Tor entry nodes. Why the Tor router is probably the best anonymized network on the planet is because it uses and employs something called frequency hop or location hop. This location hop allows them to jump from node to node to node to node to node. And as of right now, I think there's somewhere close to like 400 Tor nodes around the globe. And one of the things that is interesting about this is that within one resolution of a URL that you're looking for, you will probably within microseconds jump through thousands of miles apart from each other on a routine basis. So whenever you stay anonymous, whenever you enter the Tor network, you're constantly being bounced around. You're never staying static in one particular location. This is the reason why whenever people go into the Tor node, it's almost impossible for them to be blocked or stopped or identified or traced. The NSA is a cool story. The NSA attempted to try to do some really highly complicated math, things that are way beyond me, to identify and try to see if they can trace people. What they ended up finding out after years of studying and trying is that it's virtually impossible. It would take a supercomputer or quantum computer to be able to do the appropriate math calculations to be able to identify and trace somebody. And even then, they wouldn't get a probability that would be something of a high confidence level for locating the individual or trying to identify who it was or where they were. So in this video,
got a quick question. Yep. I got a quick question.
Sure.
So I pretty much did this in the military. It was the same thing. We did it with, our internet and with our radios, with the frequency hop. But we could actually see the transmissions in between. Like we could see that it was being transmitted. Is that because we own that transmission or the frequency hop, or so we couldn't read the emails, or we couldn't hear the radio calls, but we could see the transmissions.
Right. Well, there's a simple explanation for that, right? And the reason why, whenever you're using the SINGARs or using ICOMs or embitters and stuff like that, right? You're placing that frequency in a known state. So you're putting in a key, you're entering a cryptographic key to say, hey, this is where we're going to start. And then that key is then configuring that to be able to bounce and move around in an encrypted fashion, right? So even when that transmission is encrypted, you're still going to be able to hear that the transmission might be going off, especially if they do the frequency hop, or if they match the frequency hop, or if they do a broad spectrum analysis of the frequency range. They're going to be able to see that something happens. But then what they're not going to be able to do is, because it's encrypted, that all they're going to hear is a bunch of data sounds, the squeals and squelches and stuff like that. They're not going to be able to understand exactly what's going on. The reason why in the military we do what they call 5-second burst communication, or short term or short broadcast communication, is because the longer you stay on the net, especially whenever you're doing encrypted traffic, the longer the broad spectrum sweep has the opportunity to be able to analyze that enough to be able to identify what frequency and what cryptographic key is being used to potentially break that protection.
So that's why they say don't key the mic.
Yep.
Okay.
That's right.
Got it.
Yep. So just so everybody knows, I was in the Army for 12 years. So I know what Brandon was talking about there. So the Tor node pretty much operates somewhat similarly, right? Instead of it operating in the sense that we're broadcasting in a broad spectrum frequency, where we're doing like ultra high frequency or ultra low frequencies and stuff like that, they're doing this over multiple different node transfers. And so even though they're using TLS to enter the node with the Tor network, the entrance node is never the same as your exit node. And so therefore, whenever the traffic is returned back and forth, it always doesn't come back to the same location. So that's the reason why the Tor maintains anonymity. And that's the reason why the NSA was wasted about 2 years of their time trying to figure out how way to be able to get into that. There were some things that they did figure out. And I will say, the more that you get into the cyber career, and you're going to be able to realize that oftentimes, can anyone think of the best way to be able to get information from someone before it goes through some type of encryption or transformation? Think of it like a quarterback throwing a football. Is it easier to
Is it
get
asking
the
like
football?
questions or something as simple as a birthday or favorite color or favorite food or a family member?
So that would be part of like the password, right? I mean, so that's in this case, that's not exactly what we're referring to here. So if I were to, let's talk about, I don't want to give away some other stuff in other classes or try to mix this up. But if you think about any type of broadcast, the way the internet works, right, is that if I am saying, Jasmine, I'm going to send information to you, or Brandon, I'm going to send information to you, or Tristan, I'm going to send information to you, I have to start it from somewhere, right? Before it starts to get encrypted through the TLS channels, it starts in plain text from me, especially if I'm writing a text or an email, right? So before it goes through the transformation or the encapsulation or the envelope to be able to create that packet and that TLS transfer, then it's still in a clear text mode. So what they found out is that if you get to before the entrance to the node and at the exit of the node, that's when they can start seeing certain pieces of information and start correlating events. But there's a really, really good book that goes way more into detail about this, and it's very entertaining. It's also a little alarming, but it's also very entertaining. I'll give it that. It's called "This Is How the World Ends." It's all talking about cyber warfare, cybersecurity, and all that kind of stuff like that. But it really goes into detail about exactly how, in the logic behind the way computers work, and at what point in time, and simple solutions oftentimes can outthink extravagant and well thought out genius level architecture. And then the simplest things can get you. And that's kind of why we're on the defense side. We're constantly searching, and as we're trying to be proactive instead of reactive, we have to threat hunt. We have to go out and search. We got to go do some threat intelligence analysis, because one of the tiniest little things, such as someone sending me a phishing email and is listening to my computer on the C2 spot or on my router, can identify when I'm getting ready to transmit packets through the Tor node, or on the back end, get it after it's been unencrypted and it's gone through all of its hops and repackaged on the back end, and to be able to get it from there. And then if people are really smart and they have a lot of the reach, like a lot of these government powers do, because they all own all the infrastructure, they have the ability to be able to do some correlation. So that's why anonymity and OPSEC is 100% required for any level of this type of operation that's going on, because if the good guys can do it, or pseudo good guys, depending on how you look at it, the bad guys absolutely can do it too. So Jasmine, go ahead.
So, can't you also be able to track those who are trying to get that type of information that is encrypted through like Wireshark? Like you can see that, if the information or the data is still encrypted, or how you can see if anything is like you're trying to see the red flags from the coloring of what's going on, dealing with if someone is trying, like you say, on the back end of things, or trying to like hack into your computer or your data or get your information that's supposed to be encrypted, because I know within Wireshark certain things are encrypted or is encrypted.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is it's complicated. Yes. So I'll give you kind of a quick explanation of why the long answer is really complicated, is because whenever you're talking about being able to analyze your traffic patterns and being able to see that, now you're starting to get into something called behavior analytics of the way your network on your computer is working. And so whenever you're getting to that point, now you're starting to look at, okay, I know who I am, and I know who I'm attempting to communicate with. If I'm looking at Wireshark, the only thing that I'm going to be able to see on encrypted traffic is quite possibly the only thing that you're going to be able to see is the IP addresses. All the traffic patterns, unless it's over port 80, you're not going to be able to see exactly what's going on. Well, port 80 and port 53, the telnet and all that kind of stuff like that, DNS are all in clear text. Anytime something gets transmitted over 443, all you're going to see is a bunch of encrypted nonsense that's going to be really difficult to be able to break. Does that make sense? We will talk a little bit more about, and later on, I will be able to give you some higher level instruction. And I think in other courses, I want to keep this staying on the deep and dark web hunting. But there are other courses that are in the works that are going to talk to you a little bit more about how to analyze and utilize networking resources to be able to better protect yourself, as well as being able to conduct the penetration test kind of stuff, or ethical hacking. Any questions before we talk a little bit about the ephemeral and the human readable onion URLs?
Just a quick question. So, because I'm looking at the slide, so basically this is just saying they don't have a domain name.
That is correct.
Okay, got it.
So this one, you can see. Can anyone tell what this might be?
It's a government website from the CIA.
It is the government website. It is the CIA. This is a legitimate onion site. You go here, you actually get same access to the CIA's website, to include a special section there where you can drop data or information that might be something close to like national security, or something that they might want to know about, kind of like a top 10 targets, kind of stuff like that.
Or aliens.
Or aliens, yeah. Yep. Aliens works too, the whole 3-eye atlas. You never know. It's an awfully big universe, right? The one thing that I want to talk about though is the ephemeral sites. There, like I said before, there are a couple of really good resources, and we'll talk about this the next session, that have attempted to conduct searches on the onion and be able to help index the onion to make it easier, something like the Google for the dark web. There's no Google for the dark web, as far as I know. There could be. I'm not sure, but there's a couple of sites that are out there that do help you do this. And one of the things and methods that they use is they use a Python script that helps them use word recognition in certain key elements of the browsing and the websites. And so it will scrub the Tor node as fast as it possibly can on specific words, like keywords like, drugs or terrorist or journalism or human rights, that kind of stuff. And it will attempt to identify those ephemeral sites, and then on a daily basis or on an hourly basis in some situations, will then recrawl that site to make sure that site is still the same. And if it's not, it'll change it to match any of the keywords that are there. So the difference here is that on Google and Bing and stuff like that, you can kind of have an idea. You can enter a phrase or a sentence, and the search engine has enough intelligence to be able to identify the key things that are there that might be able to help you narrow down some of the searches to get the search hits correct. Or, if you, has anyone ever heard of something called Google dorking? By show of hands, who's heard of something called Google dorking? Nobody, man. Okay, so Google dorking is awesome, right? And I'm going to stay on track. If you haven't seen it, Google is a massive search engine, right? So is Bing, but it is a database. And when you have a database, you have a data structure. And so Google dorking attempts to utilize the data structure to specifically hone in on the things that you want to see. And I implore you, anybody who wants to be a penetration tester, ethical hacker, blue team, purple team, red team, anything, any one of the colors or teams or anything that you want to do, I highly implore you to get familiarized with Google dorking. That way that you can be able to understand the search engine structure as well as help you identify specific things that will be absolutely an incredibly useful tool in your career.
Is Google dorking spelled the way you're saying it?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh.
Yep. And I'll put it in the chat of that. Okay. So while I'm putting this in the chat and I attempt to multitask, I would like to show you this piece right here, these ephemeral sites. These are the ones that are oftentimes you're going to find some of the more nefarious stuff under, because they're always constantly moving. And as people have said, I have, and some of my digital forensics and some of my analysis in my career, I've run across some really not great things that have made you question humanity, things that have made you, and have been in the military and combat arms, I've seen some pretty bad things. Here, you see the worst of humanity in the dark web in a lot of ways. And the reason why I have address examples here is that because there are good sources on the dark web, but there is an awful lot of bad stuff there too. And a lot of the ephemeral sites that are there is a pretty good telltale sign that there's probably not great things there. So whenever you're dealing with when your onion scanner, or we're teaching you the how to utilize your live ephemeral tail OS to be able to stay anonymous, just understand that even though you don't save anything, your eyes sometimes can't unsee some things whenever you see it. That's why we have a disclaimer here, because I'm telling you that has anyone ever dabbled on the dark web at all?
Only in school.
Okay.
Only in school and for experimental reasons with other people who were ethical hackers or are ethical hackers.
Okay. Did you by chance see anything that while you were there?
Like you said, things that stick with you that you see with, some stuff I did not like to see at all. I didn't like seeing this. So I agree with you.
Yep. So that is where this is where all the things happen. So if you see an ephemeral site, and the way that you can tell this is an ephemeral site, and oftentimes the way that I do this is that I will start my investigation as soon as there's an incident or something that I'm trying to analyze or conduct a threat hunt experiment. I will then first scan using my onion scanner, and then I will give it about 2 to 3 hours, and then I will scan again on the same keyword, and then I'll identify whether or not that if the ephemeral site has changed and any part of the structure, again, the first format or the first segment of the onion site or URL can stay the same. But if any one of these pieces back here start changing on a pretty rapid pace and basis, then we know that they're employing the hopping method, and this is probably a good sign that there's some not great things there, right? Okay, I think we've hit on that enough. So we're gonna talk more about these in the weeks to come, and we're gonna show you some cool techniques and methods here, and we'll get you kind of set up to be able to do this in an anonymous and safe way, and help you navigate things to be able to make sure that you don't see the worst of humanity as much as you might run into if you otherwise did it on your own. All right. So legal considerations. With anything that we do, even though you might get all the certifications, you might work for a company that employs you to be a penetration tester. I have seen this numerous times. Some colleagues of mine that have actually been investigated for doing certain things, such as friends, former students, other contacts that have actually run into legal issues as being a threat hunting or penetration tester, because a lot of times states will have their own laws on cyber crimes, and they monitor very well, and they utilize certain sources such as they'll utilize. I'm sorry, I'm seeing other people jump in. Hi, Chauncey, Jayla, welcome. They'll utilize certain sources such as your internet service provider, and they will make sure that they actually have what they call fusion cells in law enforcement, where they all communicate to each other, right? And so you have to, in everything that you do, understand your state and local laws. You have to always make sure that you maintain anonymity and maintain anonymous, and be cautious always where you go, and understand and keep that same that principle that if I am being watched. So if you treat that like I am being watched while you're going through a lot of these certain situations, you're not going to go wrong, right? So here's another thing. Whenever you are involved in incident response, we got a bunch of new people here. By show of hands, who's all in the cybersecurity realm, like the community? Who does this for a profession? Right, Alfred. I know Chauncey. Yep, right. Has anyone ever been involved in an incident response for your company? And the newcomers, you can come off mute and talk whenever. If this is a question I'm asking everybody.
No, I haven't.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you. When every cyber security or every security operations has an incident response procedure, if they're a legitimate security operations service. So in this case, whenever you run through the threat hunt and you stumble across anything that you're trying to match to your hypothesis, or you're doing some proactive searching or proactive hunting, you're using keywords that have identified that you're trying to use to protect your company. Let's say Acme Z is your company, and you're wanting to make sure that no data breaches happen. You started seeing some anomalous behavior on your network traffic and stuff like that, and you started seeing some things, nothing immediately jumping out as an indicator of attack, but you wanted to make sure, right? So you go on the dark web and you type in Acme XYZ, and you see some hits. Upon going through and starting to conduct your deep web hunt, you start identifying and looking at some of the information that's there, and you're like, uh-oh, we have an issue. At that point in time, whenever you identify there's an issue, you always should enact your incident response plan. Whether that's going to be from your legal to your incident response, there should be an escalation workflow, and you should always follow through with it and treat it as though it's an actual breach upon discovery, because it's always better to act the plan than find out later that this is old information, that they're aware of it, or that there's something that they're not actually worried about. Or this is not detrimental to the organization. This is all open source information. And as you become more involved in your company, you'll probably be able to see some of that too. But it's always better to enact the response, to identify that there's a potential problem. And again, if the local laws or your organization or your regulated industry says that you have a duty and an obligation to contact law enforcement, follow that as necessary. So there's always legal considerations, especially in everything that we do, as an official or a professional capacity. And you should always make sure that we're staying and operating within that boundary. Any questions about that so far?
Oh,
Nope. All right. Right. So here's the other thing. So this is the legal boundaries and safety reminders. We talked about this. We don't have to go too much into this information. We talked about don't participate or interact with any of the people on the dark web that are attempting to sell this information, or say reach out to this email address. Don't do that. Oftentimes not a great method, especially whenever they find out that you're not actually willing to buy something. A lot of times they try to start spam bombing you or do something else that probably don't really want to have happen or deal with. If you're anonymous, then still, because we're still operating, we're the good guys, remember. So we're making sure that we're not interacting with bad guys in any capacity. And absolutely, nope, not even going to say that. Do not attempt to de-anonymize any of the information, and do not attempt to hack the service operator. There are some organizations that have hackback policies, and those are the cool people. I'm not going to lie, it makes you feel better whenever you're hitting back the attackers, but it just makes you a big target. So that is the things that to help you remain safe. And now we're going to talk about operation security. All right. So we talked a little bit about maintaining your ability to be safe in your own operations as well as your own personal security. OPSEC is the abbreviation form of operational security. It kind of got its name from the military, where In the military, whenever there was massive troop movements or there was major operational changes or things that were getting ready to happen, oftentimes there were key indicators that would be the bad guys or our enemy would be able to key on to be able to identify certain things, such as we're having a major troop movement. We might be super good about masking our equipment movement and everything else like that. But what happens if we need to purchase 700 pounds or 700 tons of potatoes and meat to feed our troops? Do you think that might be able to be something that might indicate that something major is getting ready to happen? There's other things about that too, such as equipment or money exchange or things that are starting to show up. When I was in the military, I took the OPSEC level 2 course. That was my battalion's instructor for operational security. And one of the intelligence briefs that we had showed that the Taliban went from being low threat level to being a high threat level, even though they're not as sophisticated as the United States or any other nation state actor. They had the wherewithal to be able to go through all the social media and to go through all of the blogs and the locations where people might gather or communicate information. And they were able to search and scour the web to be able to find any information that was related to troop movements. And they would find out information at a really rapid pace and be able to know a lot of intelligence about the U.S. military or many of our allies. In this case, compartmentalization and identities when you're doing OPSEC in the hunt, think about it in the same concept as what the example I just gave you about the military, right? The compartmentalization and identities and tools is that you want to make sure that your identities are remaining anonymized. So you don't ever want to use the same one over and over again. You also want to make sure that you can there's nothing wrong with using an ephemeral one, especially whenever you're using operating systems that are ephemeral or live themselves, like TailOX. Make sure that you're in those virtual environments. Again, next week, we'll talk more about those virtual environments. And whenever you're conducting these types of investigations, never mix any of your personal information in there at all. Your birth dates, your kids' names, your dog's name, your street, nothing. Always use nothing that identifies you as you. Now, we just talked a little bit about some ephemeral VMs and some live OSs. Anybody have any ideas of what I'm talking about? I know Chauncey does. Chauncey can come off and mute and talk about this a little bit, put him on the spot or not. Okay, he doesn't want to talk about it. All right, so ephemeral VMs. Does anybody have any ideas before I move on and try to give you an answer?
Ask the question one more time. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, does anybody, what is an ephemeral VM?
Is it still dealing with like an encryption or a different type of like a private server or private IP address?
Yeah, I mean, you can think of it like that. I mean, you think of it as something that when I turn it on, go on, Brandon. That's how you come on.
No, I was just gonna say, isn't it like setting up a VM on your host laptop or computer, and then using that to do whatever you need to do?
Yep.
And then pretty much deleting it after you're done.
Absolutely. Just as Jasmine just said, and Brandon, this is, and those who just come from Chauncey's class talking about AWS, they have something called auto scaling groups, right? Or terminated VMs. In this case, an ephemeral VM is something that is short-lived, that can be spun up, have all the makings of whatever it is that you need, whether it be like your Windows machine and stuff like that. It has all the things that you tell it that you want it to start with. And then as soon as you hit the power off button, all of it's gone. It's wiped away, like nobody ever used it. Live OSs are very similar. They're a lot more lightweight, and 99% of them are all run off of Linux. And so these are the best ways to be able to do this. And my favorite one, and the one that we're going to talk about next week, is Tails OS. It can literally run on a thumb drive. It's great. You're going to love it. All right. So the last step here for operational security for hunting is avoid attribution trails. Again, this is one of those things that we want to make sure before you start doing a hunt or before you have a possibility to engage with people on the dark web. Because again, this is where you're going to find some real heavy hitters on the dark web, some APT groups, some nation state actors. You're going to find some people that are on the anonymous network. Well, anonymous is not really, they're nothing super crazy, but you're going to find some people who don't normally make the news because they're the ones that behind the scenes that are hacking banks and the White House and, political organizations, that kind of stuff. So they're the ones that are really smart and know what they do and know what a silent professional is. And they're really good at what they do. I'll just put it that way. So make sure that whenever you are operating on the dark web, that you're routing a lot of your traffic through VMs or proxies or on the Tor network, which is kind of the same thing as kind of a proxy, proxy / VM. And then make sure you never log into anything using anything that can be traced back to you. Now, I say that a lot of times because the reason why is that I've actually seen people who have done threat hunts before where they've used email addresses that they thought were really clever, that thought that they were not actually kind of, that they had nothing to do with themselves, but they were using it from the same company, from the same location. And what ended up happening was that they were identified by the phishing campaign that was sent back to the individual. And basically what ended up happening was that they clicked on it. It didn't do anything to the machine other than to identify who they were. And so once they identified who they were, then they started getting hit with all kinds of other crazy things, which is another reason why you do all of your activity on ephemeral or live operating systems. That way that if something bad does happen, you do slip up, you do get identified, you just wipe it clean, start it over. New identity, go into digital witness protection program and start over again, right? Simple enough, low harm. Again, even though I've reiterated it again multiple times, always assume you're being watched because most of the time you are. And if you read that book, This is How the World Ends, you'll see why. So it's a good book. It's also scary. Go ahead, Brandon.
So when I was in school, we used, I can't remember, Brave Tor.
Okay.
And it was basically the instructor told us that that's what you use to browse anonymously. Is it really anonymous? Like just listening to you, is it really anonymous or?
So it all depends, right? So whenever you're using the extensions to browsers and not the Tor network, you can't really tell. There's a couple of things you can do to tell. You can go in your command line or you can go to the website called ifconfig.io, and it will let you know that you are from a Tor identified Tor network. Or you can go in your command line, you can type in ifconfig or do netstat to be able to identify what traffic and where you're communicating and where you're going, or TCP dump if you're on Linux machine. You can do things to be able to identify that, but I never assume that anything that I get from a browser other than the Tor, and sometimes even the Tor, I make sure that I'm entered that node and that network before I do anything. Anything from a browser's perspective, because they have plugins and they have extensions on Chrome, Safari, Brave, Opera, and Firefox. I always make sure that I successfully enter that node and I'm not in some sort of kind of weird split tunnel thing or split protocol where they have you being on, their browser for tracking and, ad purposes and ad selling purposes. So there are ways that you have to make sure that you are actually being anonymous in those situations. And they're not really hard. And we'll talk about it next week. That will show you some of the tips and methods that you can actually go and make sure that you are. But I will say, I never, and this is kind of the paranoia, the professional paranoia, as we like to call it. I never trust any of the major browsers that are out there, even though they're saying that they're anonymous, because Google has been and violated their antitrust in their incognito mode. Edge has violated their antitrust in private mode. All of those browsers, they always have something that follows you back. And there's like cookies or pixels, something along the lines. They can always figure it out. And if they really wanted to, they will take that data. And even if they anonymize the data, they still kind of know where it's coming from. So you're still being tracked in a lot of ways. So I always make sure that whenever I do go into the dark web for any type of threat hunt, that I make sure that I am actually browsing anonymous. I am anonymous at that point in time. I see that all my traffic there, and I don't ever cross out until I'm ready to come out of the node or the Tor. Does that make any sense? Make sense?
Yep, makes perfect sense.
Okay, we'll move on. So I won't get into too much. I know that there's another class that talks about threat hunting in a more structured manner. And so whenever you're doing this, it's assumed that you already know threat hunting. and know how to conduct a hunt. But kind of a quick little crash course. Whenever you are threat hunting, especially on the dark web, you need to maintain a log, right? Because if you're trying to go back into and identify specific things that are maybe helping you be able to identify potential threats or are principal actors or things along those lines that are you need to protect your organization, then you'll have to go back and make sure that you take a log. Because again, we talked about ephemeral things. We talked about hashes. We talked about keywords that even whenever you're dealing with the ephemeral nature of, data dumps and proof of concepts of breaches and hacks and stuff like that, those don't stick around. They don't stay forever, right? So they'll stick and move. They won't stick in the same spot for very long, so they don't get tracked or traced, or somebody to be able to download a tracker or some sort of program inside of their data to where that they activate it and they can get identified by law enforcement, which is a common ploy. But what ends up happening here in this situation is you need to always keep track of what tools you use, what commands you executed, that way that you can reverse them whenever you need to go back into to finish up your hunt, or whenever you have to go in front of law enforcement. Law enforcement's going to ask these questions like, how did you know this? If you tell them that, hey, while I was conducting my threat hunt, I found that a bunch of my company's passwords were breached. A lot of times the question law enforcement's going to ask you is, how do you know that? Where did you go? Can you show me how you did it? Kind of situations, right? So as a professional, and this is what the difference between somebody who's just doing it kind of for fun, and this is someone who's doing it as a professional, always maintain a record of exactly what it is that you're doing. This happens for two reasons. One, for repeatability. Two, the other one is if they ever encounter any potential issue against law enforcement, against you and the activities you were doing, you having a record of this is actually showing them exactly what you did and why you were doing it. So they don't come after you and say that, hey, you were conducting illicit and illegal activities based off of these laws. You can say, no, I was doing this based off of a threat hunt, that I was doing this for a professional organization as a professional. So any questions about this so far? All right, so we're going to show some examples in our capstone. So I'm going to give you an example of the logs that I make in the weeks to come, and how I use and how I conduct threat hunts. And for your capstone, I want you to come with a professional way that whenever we deal with the hunts and we start going into the hunts in week 6 to identify specific targets or information, I want to have a record of exactly what you did during that hunt to be able to identify the specific things that we're looking for. So that's going to be kind of homework. So kind of think about that. So this is going to be helpful for your professional life. It's also going to be helpful for being able to get the most out of this course. All right. So we're coming close towards the end here. So we're going to talk about the key takeaways here. Talked about how the internet's divided from the surface, deep, and dark webs, each with a distinct purpose. And of course, we identified some of the potential risks involved in each one, because there are definitely risks in the surface, deep, and dark web. We talked about accessing the dark web safely requires specialized tools. Again, didn't want to get into that too much because we can talk a little bit more about how to be safe. Next week, we're going to start using these tools, and we're going to give you kind of the steps and talk about how to use them, how to install them, how to get them, where to go, all that kind of stuff like that. But as always, we always want to make sure that we're operating within that legal boundary. So we don't want to be the people that are engaging in illicit behavior. We want to hunt the bad guys, right? We want to hunt the hunters. So that's the phrase that we can kind of stick with when we're doing this, because that we are going to be the hunter. Maintaining and separating your real identities in your research environment through compartmentalization, encryption, or non-persistent systems. Again, we're going to talk about this next week some more, but always think about it too. Like if you were in that situation where you wanted to make sure that you maintained your anonymity, always think of yourself as a predator. Predator doesn't always want to get found out, right? And I know this sounds kind of weird, kind of counterintuitive as the good guy, but you are hunting the bad guys in this situation. You're hunting what they know, what they do, where they are, in their safe space. You're going after them. You're going to try to find them so you can build your defenses and or change things based off of what they think they know. So they can't monetize or cause any further damage to your organization or to you, that matter. Any questions so far? So now we're in that question mode. So anybody who has questions can ask. I know that some of the latecomers missed some of the beginning, but we have the opportunity to go back and look. Here's a little nice to know kind of situation. We talked about some of the how the dark web gets a negative reputation, but there's also positive uses behind the reputation or the dark web as well. That again is legitimate uses for privacy, research, and journalism, as well as being able to get information out of oppressive situations or organizations or regimes. Okay, we're at that point. Of course, we have a time blocked for that 2 hours, and I want to respect everybody's time, but I also want to make sure I'm available to anybody who has questions. And again, we're in our learning state, and there are no bad questions. So I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity. This is a safe space for people to be able to talk and be able to ask questions. If for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable asking a question and you want to talk or have a question answered, you can email me here at nate.chatfield@kyoriq.com, and I'll make sure that I put that in the chat as well.